Welcome to this deep dive, We're going to be looking at Frederick Douglass's essay, Why is the Negro Lynched?
Yeah.
And this one is pretty powerful stuff, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yeah, it is.
And it was written just a few months before he died in 1895.
Wow.
So really towards the end of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to kind of see what he was thinking at that time about, race relations in America and how it all kind of comes together.
Yeah, and I think this essay is so powerful because he just doesn't hold back at all.
Right.
He's calling out, the injustices of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts by issuing this plea of not guilty on behalf of Black Americans as like a class.
Okay, interesting. So he's speaking for everyone.
As a whole. And he's challenging these prevailing narratives,
Right.
the accusations of, rampant assaults against white women.
Interesting. So right off the bat, he's addressing kind of like the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Like the main justification that was used at the time for violence against Black Americans.
And he does this by, bringing logic, historical evidence. Okay. And one of the most powerful things he points to is during the Civil War. When white Southern men were away fighting, their families were often left in the care of Black men.
Right.
And yet during that time, there are no widespread reports of assaults against white women.
That's a really interesting point. If this were as pervasive as people were making it out to be, wouldn't it have been even more so during this time?
Yeah.
When the men were away?
Exactly. It's like
that narrative.
It completely undermines the whole thing. If it was really that much of a threat, why wasn't it more of a threat when the men were away?
Yeah.
So he's using that to question the very foundation of those accusations. And then he goes on to highlight how these justifications for violence they seem to evolve over time, almost like they're being intentionally constructed to serve a specific purpose.
So it's not just like random acts of racism. It's like...
No, it's more systematic.
Or like a calculated thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he outlines 3 distinct phases in these shifting justifications.
Right.
First, we have the accusations of Black conspiracies and insurrections.
Right.
Trying to paint them as dangerous and rebellious.
Right.
Then we have the claims of Black political domination.
Oh, wow.
Which were used to undermine, Black voting and political power.
Right.
And then finally, we have the emergence of these assault accusations.
Right.
Which played on racial anxieties and fears to justify further violence and control.
It's like they were looking for any excuse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, like any excuse to
justify what they were doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think that Douglass saw this as a deliberate strategy?
I think absolutely he recognizes that these accusations weren't isolated incidents, but rather they were part of a broader strategy to disenfranchise Black Americans.
And when we say disenfranchise, we're not just talking about taking away the vote.
Exactly.
We're talking about a lot more than that.
Yeah, taking away their power, their political power, and making it easier to justify violence against them by painting them as a threat.
Right.
It creates this climate of fear.
Right.
And it silences dissent.
It's a pretty scary thought.
It is.
That it was all being done so intentionally.
Yeah.
And systematically.
And he was deeply concerned about this.
Yeah.
About the erosion of democracy and the denial of basic rights.
Right.
He even draws parallels to attempts to limit suffrage based on education, which was something he vehemently opposed.
So he believed that everyone should be able to vote.
Everyone, regardless of background.
Yeah.
Should have a voice in the political process.
Okay, so we're seeing this system that's designed to silence and oppress.
Yeah.
Did Douglass see any hope at this time?
He did. Despite the grim reality that he was depicting, he still called for justice.
Okay.
And urged white Americans to confront their prejudices and uphold the Constitution. The promises of equality.
Wow.
He had faith in the power of moral persuasion.
Okay.
And the possibility of a more just society.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
So he believed that change could happen?
He did.
How did he envision it happening?
Well, he uses this compelling example of this historical debate over whether Black people should be baptized.
Huh.
Right?
That's an interesting...
It sounds absurd now, but this was a serious debate.
Wow.
And, there were arguments made against it.
Wow.
And Douglass brilliantly flips the script.
Okay.
And argues that the real problem isn't with Black people.
Right.
But with the nation's failure to live up to its own ideals.
So instead of focusing on what they perceived as flaws with Black people, He shifts the focus to the systemic issue. Okay.
Yeah.
So by highlighting this historical parallel, he exposes the hypocrisy of this whole Negro problem framing.
Of the whole framing of it as a problem with black people.
Right.
He says, no, the problem is with us.
Wow.
Our failure to live up to these ideals.
Wow. So the solution then is to adhere to the principles that we already claim to have.
Yeah. Justice and equality.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty powerful.
It is. It is powerful stuff. So we've been talking about, these justifications that were being used for oppression.
Right.
And then shifting to other ones as they were debunked.
Yeah, like as they stopped working, they had to come up with new ones.
Right. And Douglass really kind of highlighted this idea of, justice and equality.
Yes.
And how that seems to be kind of the solution.
Right. Like the key
Yeah.
to fixing this whole thing.
Yeah. I'm curious about that, though.
Okay.
When he talks about, true freedom.
Right.
He seems to be talking about more than just like, emancipation from slavery.
Exactly.
He's talking about something else, too.
Yeah. He's talking about economic opportunity.
Right.
And fairness.
What did he mean by that?
Well, he was deeply critical of the labor practices that were prevalent in the South after the Civil War. Things like sharecropping. Okay. Where, black farmers were basically trapped in a cycle of debt and poverty.
Yeah.
And the practice of paying black workers with scrips, which could only be redeemed at company stores.
Oh, wow. So they're not even getting, like, real money.
Exactly. And it further limits their economic freedom.
It's almost like,
a new form of slavery. Yeah, disguised in a different form. Right. And that's what Douglass saw it as. He believed that these practices were a deliberate attempt to undermine the promise of emancipation.
Oh, wow.
And keep black Americans economically dependent.
So what did he think was the way to fix this?
Well, he argued that fair wages, access to land ownership, and protection from these practices were essential for black Americans to achieve genuine equality.
So it sounds like he's calling for like a pretty big change.
Yeah.
Like systemic change.
He is.
Did he think that was going to be possible?
Well, he advocated for a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
He believed in the power of education and self-help.
Okay.
To uplift communities. But he also saw a role for government intervention in protecting the rights of black workers, promoting fair labor practices, and ensuring equal access to economic opportunities.
So it sounds like he was saying we need like both?
Yeah, we need both.
Individual and
systemic change.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a pretty comprehensive approach.
It is.
To really solving this problem.
It is.
Do you think he actually believed that white Americans would embrace this?
That's a complex question.
Yeah.
He was a fierce critic of American racism and hypocrisy.
Right.
But he also held on to a belief in the possibility of progress.
Okay.
He believed that the nation's ideals, as enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, held the potential for a more just and equitable society.
So he's saying, like, we're not living up to our own
ideas.
Yes. And that's the problem.
Exactly. Okay. He argued that the nation was failing to live up to its own promises, and that this failure was not only a moral stain, but also a threat to the very fabric of American democracy.
So he saw this as like a very fundamental problem.
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't just about black people. It was about America.
The whole country.
The whole country.
Wow. Did he see any signs of hope?
He did.
Okay.
He pointed to the resilience and progress of black Americans. Despite facing overwhelming obstacles, he saw the growing number of black educators, professionals, activists, as a testament to the indomitable spirit of his people.
So he was seeing, like, strength even in the midst of all this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he believed that their struggles and triumphs would ultimately help push the nation towards a more just and equitable future.
So it's like they were leading the way.
Yeah, they were leading the way.
By example.
By example.
Yeah.
And that was a source of hope for him.
Wow. It's a really powerful message.
Yeah.
That even in the midst of all this, there's still that hope for
progress, for a better future.
We've been talking about kind of his analysis of the problem.
Right.
And his vision for the future.
Yeah.
Did he have any advice for, like, what people should actually do?
He did.
Okay.
He believed that silence and justice was complicity.
Okay.
So he emphasized the importance of speaking out, challenging prejudice wherever it's encountered, and supporting organizations and individuals working to advance the cause of racial equality. reality.
So it's not enough to just, like, believe the right things.
No, you have to act.
You got to do something.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like putting your beliefs into action.
Exactly.
Okay.
He believed that everyone had a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world.
Okay. So this is a message that feels like it still applies to us today, even though this was written so long ago.
His words are timeless.
Yeah.
You know, and they resonate with the challenges we face even today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how his words still resonate today.
They really do. What are some of the things that really stand out to you from this essay?
Well, you know, for me, one of the biggest takeaways is Douglass's just unwavering belief in the power of truth and justice.
Okay.
Even in the face of, you know, just unimaginable brutality and oppression.
Right.
He just refused to give up hope.
Wow.
He believed that by exposing the lies, challenging the status quo, appealing to the conscience of the nation, that real change was possible.
It's a powerful message of hope.
It is.
You know?
Yeah.
Even in the darkest times.
It's a reminder that we can't give up.
Yeah.
We have to keep fighting.
And he wasn't just talking about it.
No.
He was living it.
Right. He was a man of action.
Yeah.
He believed in the power of individuals to make a difference.
And he gave us some pretty concrete ideas.
He did.
About how to do that.
Right. Like speaking out against injustice.
Yeah.
Challenging prejudice.
Supporting those who are working for change.
Yeah. And supporting organizations working for change.
Yeah. It's like he's giving us this blueprint. For how to create a better world.
A roadmap for how to move forward.
And it all comes back to that idea of justice and equality.
It does.
Which are, you know, American ideals.
Exactly.
But we're not always living up to.
Right.
And that's, I think, the challenge that he's putting forth.
Yeah, and I think his essay is just such a powerful reminder that the fight for racial justice is not just a historical event.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
It's still happening today.
It's still happening today.
We all have a part to play in it.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
I feel like we've learned so much.
Me too.
About Frederick Douglass and his ideas.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners have too.
I hope so.
What's your final thought for our listeners today?
I would just encourage everyone to go and read Douglass's work for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much wisdom and insight there. And I think it's more relevant now than ever.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
667.